Chapter 1. The Invitation. Chapter 1 Inch. The Invitation. Cynthia's phone buzzed as she sat alone in her dimly lit apartment, the flickering light from the street outside casting long shadows on the wall. She glanced down, expecting another message from her annoying landlord, but instead, it was an unknown number. The message was brief and strange. "You have been chosen." At first, she rolled her eyes, dismissing it as a spam text. But as she was about to swipe it away, another message appeared. "Do not ignore this. There are consequences." Her heart skipped a beat. Cynthia wasn't one to scare easily, but something about the tone of these words, so direct and final, made her feel uneasy. She hesitated, then decided to call her best friend, Mark. "Mark, I just got this weird message. It says, you have been chosen. Do you think it's some kind of joke?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Probably spam or some prank." "Just ignore it," Mark replied, though his voice sounded a bit too calm, almost as if he was trying to convince himself as much as her. Before she could respond, another buzz. This time, it wasn't just a message. It was a photo. The image showed a room she recognized instantly. It was her apartment, taken from outside her window. A chill ran down her spine as she stood up and closed the curtains in one swift motion. "Cynthia, you're being watched." Before she could react, another text came in. "Welcome to the game. Only one will survive." The screen went black, and a new notification popped up, coordinates. The tension in the room thickened. She felt like the walls were closing in on her, suffocating her with their silence. "Mark," she said with a tremor in her voice, "I think this is serious. They just sent a picture of my place, from outside." There was a long pause on the other end. "Cynthia, listen to me carefully," Mark finally said, his tone now laced with urgency. "You're not the only one who got that message. I got it too." Cynthia's breath hitched. She had 100 questions, but the only one that mattered was, what do we do now? "We follow the game." The voice that came through the phone wasn't Mark's, but a distorted, mechanical one. "Or we die." Magnifying glass tilted left. Are you enjoying the suspense so far? Don't forget to subscribe and share to see how this thriller unfolds. Magnifying glass tilted left. Chapter 2. The Gathering. Chapter 2. The Gathering. Cynthia stood in the middle of a desolate parking lot, her eyes darting to the small group of people gathered there. The coordinates led her here, a rundown, abandoned area on the outskirts of the city. The air was thick with anticipation and fear, as if the shadows themselves were whispering secrets no one wanted to hear. Mark was already there, pacing nervously. Beside him stood 3 other strangers, each one with the same uneasy look in their eyes, their bodies tense like they were waiting for something to jump out at them. A woman with short, dark hair clutched her phone tightly, her knuckles white from the pressure. A tall man in a suit looked out of place, like he just stepped out of a corporate meeting. And a younger guy with a backpack kept checking his watch, sweat glistening on his forehead despite the cool evening air. "Is this everyone?" Cynthia asked, breaking the silence that seemed to grow louder with every second. The tall man in the suit spoke first. "I think so. We all got the same message, right? You have been chosen. What the hell is going on here?" Before anyone could answer, a sudden noise cut through the night, a slow, deliberate clap. They turned to see a figure standing at the edge of the lot, face obscured by a dark hood. The figure's hands came together in a slow, mocking applause. "Welcome, players," the figure said in a voice that sent a shiver down Cynthia's spine. It was the same distorted voice from the phone call. "You've all been chosen for a very special game. The rules are simple. Survive." "Survive what?" the younger guy blurted out, his voice shaking. "Who are you? What do you want from us?" The hooded figure ignored his question and continued. "Each of you has a unique skill. Each of you has something that brought you here tonight. Use it, or you'll be the first to fall. The game starts now." A click echoed in the silence, and suddenly, their phones buzzed in unison. Cynthia looked down at her screen and saw a countdown timer, 10 minutes and counting down fast. The screen displayed a message. "Find the key to survive. One of you has it. Decide quickly." Panic rippled through the group. They started looking at each other with suspicion, the air thick with distrust. Who had the key? Who was lying? Mark grabbed Cynthia's arm. We need to stick together, he said urgently, his eyes darting nervously to the others. Whoever has that key might not even know it yet. Or they do know and they're planning to use it against us, Cynthia replied, her mind racing as she sized up the others. The woman with the short hair suddenly reached into her pocket, and everyone tensed, watching her every move. She pulled out a small object and held it up, a silver key glinting under the streetlight. I have it, she said, her voice trembling slightly but steady. I found this in my pocket when I arrived. I don't know how it got there. The hooded figure chuckled, a low, menacing sound. Well, it seems we have our first advantage. But the real question is, what will you do with it? The tall man in the suit lunged toward her, his hands reaching for the key, but she was quicker. She stepped back, raising her hand in warning. Stay back, she shouted. I don't trust any of you. You don't have to trust us, Mark said, trying to calm the situation. But if we don't figure out how this key works, none of us are getting out of here alive. The countdown continued, ticking down to 0 with each breath they took, the air growing colder and the shadows deeper. And Cynthia knew, in that moment, that this was only the beginning. Magnifying glass tilted left. Can't wait to see what happens next? Subscribe and share to follow the suspenseful journey to its shocking conclusion. Magnifying glass tilted left. Chapter 3. He betrayal. Chapter 3 inch dot. The betrayal. The group stood in tense silence, their eyes fixed on the woman holding the key. The countdown on their phones had dwindled to 5 minutes, each second flashing in an angry red as it ticked away. Cynthia felt like the air around them was turning into a suffocating fog, thick with mistrust and desperation. What's your name? Mark asked, trying to keep his voice steady as he addressed the woman with the key. Emma, she replied, her gaze never wavering from the others. I'm not here to play games. I just want to survive like everyone else. Then give me the key, the man in the suit said, stepping forward with a cold, calculating look in his eyes. I can handle this. We'll all have a better chance if you let someone capable take charge. Emma narrowed her eyes. Oh, so you're the capable one now? She gripped the key tighter. What makes you think you're any better than the rest of us? Cynthia watched as the tension between them thickened, a silent standoff that could snap at any moment. She didn't trust the man in the suit. Something about his demeanor was too controlled, too prepared, as if he'd been expecting this all along. How about we vote? The young guy with the backpack suggested, his voice cracking under pressure. Majority rules. Whoever we trust most should get the key. That's a terrible idea, Cynthia said, shaking her head. We don't know each other at all. A vote just gives the loudest voice control. Mark turned to her, concern etched on his face. What do you suggest, then? We're running out of time, and we still don't know what that key is for. Before Cynthia could answer, a flash of movement drew their attention. The men in the suit lunged for Emma, trying to rip the key from her hand. They struggled, the key slipping from Emma's grasp, clattering to the ground. Everyone froze, and for a second, no one moved. Then, Cynthia's instincts kicked in. She dove for the key, her fingers closing around the cold metal just as a loud horn blared from the distance, shaking the silence. She held it up, breathing hard, looking at the others who stared at her with a mixture of relief and suspicion. Stop! Mark shouted, pointing toward the hooded figure who had now taken a few steps closer. The figure raised one hand, and the timer on their phones abruptly stopped at 3 minutes. You disappoint me, the figure said, its voice dripping with mock pity. Already tearing each other apart? The key is not just an object, it's a test of your will. A test you're failing? Cynthia's mind raced. If this was a test, then maybe the answer wasn't about who held the key, but how they worked together. But how could they do that when they couldn't even trust each other? The hooded figure's hand moved again, and suddenly, the young guy with the backpack staggered backward, clutching his stomach. He looked down, his face twisting in shock as he pulled his hand away, revealing a crimson stain spreading across his shirt. No! Emma screamed, rushing to his side. But the figure's voice cut through the air like a knife. First lesson, betrayal has consequences. The group watched in horror as the young man collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. The figure turned its gaze to the rest of them, its eyes hidden but somehow piercing right through to their souls. "You will learn quickly," it said, almost gleefully. "Trust is a weakness. Survival is your only goal. Use the key wisely, or watch your numbers dwindle." Mark grabbed Cynthia's arm, his grip tight, almost bruising. "We have to figure this out now," he hissed. "Before it's too late." Cynthia nodded, her eyes still locked on the lifeless body of the young man. They had only just begun, and already the stakes were higher than she could have imagined. Whatever this game was, it was more twisted, more dangerous than she'd ever thought possible. And she knew, deep down, that this was far from over. Magnifying glass tilted left, the tension is rising. Want to see how this deadly game plays out? Make sure to subscribe and share to follow every twist and turn. Magnifying glass tilted left. Chapter 4. The Alliance. Chapter 4. The Alliance. The group's focus shifted from the lifeless body on the ground back to the key in Cynthia's trembling hand. Her mind was racing, her thoughts darting between fear, anger, and the dawning realization that if they didn't come up with a plan soon, more of them would suffer the same fate. "We can't do this alone," she said, her voice cracking slightly under the weight of her words. "We need to stop looking at each other as enemies and figure out how to get out of this together." Emma wiped a tear from her face, her eyes red but filled with a defiant determination. "You think teamwork is going to save us? Did you see what they just did to him?" She pointed to the young man's body, now lying motionless, a grim reminder of what failure looked like. The man in the suit sneered, his cold eyes narrowing as he looked at Cynthia. "You're naive if you think cooperation is going to work. This is a survival game. Only one of us gets out alive, remember? That's what they want us to believe," Mark said, stepping up to stand beside Cynthia. "But what if that's the trick? What if the only way to win is to not play by their rules?" A flicker of doubt crossed the man's face, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. "Interesting theory, but I'm not risking my life on a hunch." Cynthia turned her back on him, focusing on the others. "We need to trust each other, at least for now. There's something we're missing about this key, and we're running out of time to figure it out." Emma looked at the ground, her expression softening as she reluctantly nodded. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll work with you, but I swear, if anyone tries to stab me in the back, I won't hesitate." "Agreed," Mark said, extending his hand to her. Emma shook it, a silent pact forming between them. The tension in the air seemed to lighten ever so slightly as they turned their attention back to the key. Cynthia examined it more closely now, noticing for the first time a series of tiny symbols etched into its surface, almost like coordinates or a code. "Look at this," she said, showing it to the others. "I think these might be instructions or clues, but I can't make them out." The man in the suit leaned in, his interest piqued despite his earlier skepticism. "Those look like numbers and letters, maybe a cipher. If we can crack it, it might tell us what to do next." Emma pulled out her phone, searching through an app she had. "It's some kind of code, all right. Maybe GPS coordinates or a safe combination? We need to decode it." Mark's face lit up with realization. "Wait, let me try something." He quickly typed a series of numbers into a mapping app. A location popped up on the screen, an old, abandoned warehouse not far from where they stood. "That's it," he said, holding up the screen for everyone to see. "I think this is where we need to go. Maybe the key unlocks something there." The hooded figure, who had been silent until now, let out a slow, taunting laugh. "Oh, you think you're so clever," it said. "But you've only solved part of the puzzle. Getting to the location is one thing, surviving what's inside is another. Enough of your games." Cynthia shouted, her frustration boiling over. "What do you want from us? Why are you doing this?" The figure's voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible but dripping with menace. "You've been chosen for a reason, each of you. A test of your darkest fears, your hidden truths. Only one can emerge unscathed. The rest, well, they'll serve as reminders of what happens when you fail." Without warning, the figure disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the sound of its haunting laugh echoing in the empty lot. The countdown on their phones resumed, now set to a new timer, 30 minutes until they reached the warehouse. "Let's go," Mark said, urgency in his voice. "We've got less than half an hour to get there and figure out our next move." As they turned to leave, The men in the suit lingered for a moment, looking at Cynthia with a strange intensity. "Don't get too comfortable," he warned. "When push comes to shove, alliances fall apart. And I'll do whatever it takes to survive." Cynthia held his gaze, unflinching. "So will I," she said quietly. "But that doesn't mean I'll lose my humanity in the process." As they walked away from the scene, the tension between them was undeniable, a fragile alliance formed under the pressure of a deadly game. And even though they were now working together, Cynthia knew the real challenge lay ahead, at the warehouse, where the truth of this twisted game would finally start to unravel. Magnifying glass tilted left. Can't wait to uncover the truth behind this deadly game? Subscribe and share to see what happens when trust becomes a matter of life and death. Magnifying glass tilted left. Chapter 5. The Warehouse. Chapter 5. The Warehouse. The warehouse loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the night sky. It was a massive, decrepit structure, long abandoned and covered in vines, with windows like dark eyes staring out into the empty lot. Cynthia, Mark, Emma, and the men in the suit approached it cautiously, their footsteps crunching on the gravel, echoing through the stillness of the night. "Well, this looks inviting," Emma muttered, trying to mask her fear with sarcasm. But her hands were trembling as she held the flashlight, its weak beam cutting through the darkness. "Stay close," Mark whispered as they reached the entrance, a heavy metal door that hung slightly ajar. "And keep an eye out for anything that seems off. This place screams trap." Cynthia gripped the key tightly, her knuckles turning white. She could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on her, the urgency of the countdown ticking away in her mind. She pushed the door open slowly, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. The room stretched out into darkness, filled with old machinery and scattered debris. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and shifting as if they had lives of their own. On the far side, they could just make out a metal box sitting atop a table, its surface scratched and dented. "That must be it," Cynthia said, her voice barely above a whisper. She took a deep breath, stepping forward with the key in hand, her heart pounding in her chest. "Wait," the men in the suit hissed, grabbing her arm. "How do we know it's not rigged? This could be another one of their sick games." "We don't," Cynthia replied, pulling her arm free. "But we have no choice. We're running out of time." She crossed the room, her movements slow and deliberate, every creak of the floorboards beneath her feet echoing like a countdown drumbeat. When she reached the box, she hesitated for a split second, then slid the key into the lock. Click. The box opened with a mechanical hiss, revealing a digital display screen and another note, written in the same bold, blocky letters as before. "Choose wisely. One choice leads to freedom, the other to death. Only one may survive this round." The display flashed with two options, red or blue. No instructions, no hints, just the colors staring back at them like a twisted game show. "Are you kidding me?" Emma said, her voice filled with disbelief. "This is insane. What kind of choice is this?" Mark stepped closer, examining the screen. "There's got to be more to it," he muttered. "Maybe the colors mean something. We just have to figure out what." The man in the suit shook his head, a grim smile spreading across his face. "Or maybe it's exactly what it says, a 50-50 shot at survival. Nothing more, nothing less. Who's feeling lucky?" Cynthia's mind raced as she stared at the screen. This was a trick, a manipulation designed to tear them apart even further. She could almost hear the hooded figure's voice in her head, laughing at their desperation. The warehouse seemed to close in on her, the walls pressing in, suffocating her thoughts. Then, a thought struck her. What if the real test wasn't about which button they pressed, but about who was willing to make the choice? Who would step forward and bear the responsibility of that decision? "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady but her hands shaking. "I'll make the choice." "No," Mark said, stepping in front of her. "We'll do it together. We're not playing by their rules. If we choose as a team." Emma nodded, her expression hardened but resolve. "Agreed. No one decides alone. We're in this together, no matter what happens." The men in the suit sneered, but didn't object. For once, he seemed to understand that his usual tactics wouldn't work here. Cynthia placed her hand on the screen, and the others joined her, each of them looking at one another with a mixture of fear and determination. "Red or blue?" Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. Cynthia closed her eyes for a moment, drawing in a deep breath. "Red," she said finally, her voice steady. "We choose red." She pressed the red button, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, a loud buzz filled the air, followed by a mechanical whirring sound. The screen went black, and a door on the far side of the room creaked open. "You did it," Emma breathed, relief flooding her face. "We're still alive." But as they turned to leave, the men in the suit stopped, staring at something on the floor. There, at the edge of the shadows, was another body. It was the young guy with the backpack from earlier. He was lying there, eyes open, mouth twisted into a scream, but his body was motionless. "It's not just a game," the man in the suit said, his voice hollow. "It's a nightmare. And it's only getting worse." Cynthia knew he was right. They might have survived this round, but the game was far from over. The real horror was only beginning. Magnifying glass tilted left. The stakes have never been higher. Subscribe and share to uncover the secrets of this deadly game and see who will make it out alive. Magnifying glass tilted left. Chapter 6. The Revelation. Chapter 6. The Revelation. As they stepped through the door that had just opened, Cynthia's heart felt like a drumbeat echoing in her chest. The darkness on the other side seemed even thicker, like a suffocating blanket that swallowed all light and hope. The group moved cautiously, the silence around them amplifying every creak and crunch of their footsteps. Mark held his flashlight up, sweeping the beam across the space, revealing a series of monitors on the far wall. They blinked to life one by one, displaying live feeds of different rooms inside the warehouse, rooms filled with disturbing images of twisted traps, empty chairs, and unsettling messages scrawled on the walls. Are they watching us?" Emma asked, her voice trembling as she took a step back. Cynthia nodded, her eyes narrowing as she studied the screens. "They've been watching us the whole time. This whole place is like a giant maze, a controlled experiment. And we're the lab rats." "Look," Mark said, pointing to a screen that showed another group of people in a similar situation, their faces twisted with fear and confusion. "We're not the only ones playing this game." The realization hit them all like a punch to the gut. There were others out there, other groups being forced into the same twisted challenges, each one fighting for survival, each one unaware of the true scale of the nightmare they were in. "How many more?" Emma whispered, her face pale. "How many more are trapped in this?" Cynthia's eyes narrowed on one particular monitor that displayed a message in bold red letters. "Level 1 complete. Prepare for the next round." The word sent a chill down her spine, and she turned to the group, her voice urgent. "This isn't over. They're planning to keep pushing us until we break, until there's only one of us left standing." The man in the suit, who had been silent up until now, suddenly slammed his fist on the table. "This is insane," he shouted, his mask of calm composure finally cracking. "We need to get out of here, now." "Calm down," Cynthia said, holding up her hands. "We need to think this through. There has to be a way to stop this game, to shut it all down." A slow, mocking clap echoed from the darkness, and they all spun around to see the hooded figure once again, standing at the entrance they had come through. The figure's presence seemed to suck all the air out of the room, turning their fear into a palpable force. "Bravo," the figure said, its voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've made it this far. I'm almost impressed. But this was just the beginning. The real test is about to start." Cynthia stepped forward, defiant. "What do you want from us?" she demanded. "Why are you doing this?" The figure tilted its head slightly, as if considering her question. "You were chosen for a reason," it said. "Each of you carries something within, an instinct, a darkness that makes you perfect for this game. This is not just about survival. It's about revealing who you really are when the masks are off." "What are you talking about?" Mark said, his voice rising in frustration. "We're just normal people." "Are you?" the figure countered, its tone chilling. "You've already proven how quickly you turn on each other, how easily trust crumbles when your lives are at stake. The key was never about the object in your hand. It was about who would use it to save themselves and who would sacrifice the others." The figure stepped closer, its face still obscured in shadow, but its presence overpowering. The final stage is near, it continued. And when it begins, you'll have to confront the one thing you fear the most, yourselves. Before they could react, the monitors flickered, and new images appeared, footage of each of them in different locations at different times in their lives. Moments they thought were private, moments of weakness, of guilt, of betrayal. Cynthia's breath caught in her throat as she saw herself on the screen, a moment from her past she had buried deep, something she hoped no one would ever know. The others stared at their own images, their faces reflecting the horror of their secrets laid bare. "This is your truth," the figure said. "And the truth will be your undoing." The lights in the room flickered, then went out completely, plunging them into darkness. The countdown timer on their phones started again, ticking down faster than before, the seconds slipping away like grains of sand. "Run," the figure said, its voice echoing through the darkness, filled with cruel amusement. "Run while you still can." And they did. They turned and ran, their footsteps pounding against the cold concrete floor, the walls closing in around them. Each step brought them closer to the next challenge, the next revelation, and the inescapable reality that the true enemy in this twisted game might not be the figure behind the mask, it might be the darkness within themselves. Magnifying glass tilted left. Will they escape the nightmare, or will the darkness consume them all? Subscribe and share to stay on the edge of your seat as this deadly game unfolds. Magnifying glass tilted left. Chapter 7. The Final Choice. Chapter 7. The Final Choice. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the narrow hallway as Cynthia, Mark, Emma, and the men in the suit sprinted through the darkness. The oppressive air seemed to press in from all sides, each turn in the maze-like corridors leading them deeper into the unknown. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, and the timer on their phones continued to count down mercilessly. "Where are we going?" Emma shouted, panic edging her voice. "We're just running in circles." "Keep moving," Mark urged, his voice strained. "There has to be a way out." They burst into a vast room, the largest they had seen yet. At its center stood a large, metallic console with a screen that pulsed with a single message: "Final choice, only one may leave." Below the message were 4 symbols, each representing one of them. A button was displayed under each symbol. Cynthia's heart sank as she realized what this meant. The twisted game had led them here, to this brutal moment, a choice that would decide everything. The room's cold, mechanical hum filled the silence as they stared at the screen, their faces a mix of dread and resignation. "No," Cynthia said, shaking her head in disbelief. "We can't do this. There has to be another way." The hooded figure appeared once more, its presence commanding the space, as if it thrived on the despair and confusion in their eyes. "Ah, the moment of truth," it said, a cruel smile audible in its voice. "You've made it to the final round. But there's only one ticket out. The question is, who will claim it? Why are you doing this?" Mark demanded, his voice cracking under the pressure. "What do you get out of this sick game?" The figure's response was a chilling laugh that echoed through the chamber. "You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about winning or losing. It's about revealing the truth, what people will do when the stakes are life and death. What darkness lies beneath the surface when survival is on the line. Stop talking in circles." Emma screamed, tears streaming down her face. "Just tell us how to get out of here." "Only one of you leaves," the figure said simply. "You decide who." The room fell silent, the weight of the decision crushing them all. They looked at each other, faces filled with fear, guilt, and the unspoken question, who would they betray to save themselves? "I'm not playing this game," Cynthia said firmly, taking a step back. "I won't be the one to decide who dies." "Neither will I," Mark said, stepping to her side. "We have to find another way." But then, without warning, the man in the suit moved. His hand shot out, reaching for the console with a look of determination in his eyes. "It's survival of the fittest," he snarled. "I'm not dying here for anyone else." Before he could press the button, Cynthia lunged forward, grabbing his arm and pulling him away with all her strength. He stumbled backward, eyes wide with fury. "You're going to regret that," he shouted, charging at her. Just as he was about to reach her, a loud click echoed through the room. Emma, with tears in her eyes and a trembling hand, had pressed a button on the console. The screen blinked, and then the floor beneath the men in the suit opened like a trapdoor. He fell into the darkness with a scream that echoed long after he disappeared. The screen flashed again, elimination complete. One choice remains. Cynthia, Mark, and Emma stood frozen, staring at the console that now displayed only 2 buttons, one for Mark and one for Cynthia. "No," Cynthia whispered, looking at Emma. "Why did you do that? We could have found another way." Emma wiped the tears from her face, her expression now one of grim determination. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I couldn't risk him taking us all down. But this is it, the final choice. One of you has to press the button. Only one of us can leave." Mark looked at Cynthia, his eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and something else, something like acceptance. "Cynthia," he said softly, "you need to do it. Take the chance. Get out of here." "No," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm not leaving you behind. We stick together, remember?" "Cynthia," Mark said, his face a mask of calm even as tears welled in his eyes. "One of us has to make it out of here alive. And it's going to be you." Before she could stop him, Mark reached out and pressed the button under his own symbol. The console beeped, and the screen flashed, "Final choice accepted. Player eliminated." "No." Cynthia screamed as the floor opened beneath Mark's feet. He looked up at her one last time, a faint smile on his lips. "Live, Cynthia," he whispered as he fell, disappearing into the darkness. The room went silent, the screen now displaying a single word, "Congratulations." The door behind her opened with a loud hiss, and bright light flooded the room. Cynthia stood there, numb and broken, the reality of what she had lost sinking in. She turned slowly toward the exit, her steps heavy, knowing that she was the last one standing, not because she had won, but because everyone else had sacrificed themselves to save her. As she stepped out into the light, the hooded figure's voice echoed in her mind, "You've been chosen for a reason." And she knew that this was just the beginning. She would never truly escape the darkness that had been unleashed inside her. The game might be over, but the nightmare was only beginning. The end.